welcome to episode 52 of my Doll's House Diary. Now in today's episode I want to get the dining room to the move-in stage, so there's lots to do, we'd better get started. So I'm starting off today with the external door, or the dining room door, and I'm going to be replacing like for like. So originally it was a glazed door with lots of small panes, so that's what I'm going to be recreating today. So I've started off here by cutting the first part of the door, actual door surround that sits on the inside of the frame, and I'm just sort of showing you from the outside because obviously it's easier to get the camera at this angle rather than doing it from inside the room. But there is actually, as you can see, already a surround on the outside, so when I come to fit the door I'll be fitting it from the inside, sort of slotting it in from the inside. So I've cut my strips here using 6x3mm strip, but the thickness of the Doll's House walls is 9mm, so I'll cut some 3x3 strips to go alongside these. But the first thing to do is just to cut your strips just to get the size. So that's what I've done here. So I've got my longer strips at the sides and then a shorter strip on the inside edges of those. And I'm really happy with the fit here. So I'm now going to take these back into the craft room and cut the 3x3 strip. So once you're happy with the fit of the frame pieces, you want to make sure that the long sides and the short sides are the same length. Now I've just had to trim probably less than 0.5 mm off both of mine to get them so that they're the same length, and that's so that you have a nice square frame. Now it might not fit exactly because probably, certainly in my case, I've probably got some paint on the inside of the door surround. So that will affect obviously the height just on one side. If you're sort of working to a kit and you just want to change the door style or something, then chances are you'll have a nice square opening. So check that they're the same length so that you've got a nice square frame, and then you can cut your second piece. And the reason for this is because my Doll's House is made from 9mm thick plywood, and the strip that I've cut here is 6mm. Now you can obviously get 9mm strip, but I don't have any, so I'm using two pieces, a 6 and a 3, to obviously make my 9mm thick strip. But obviously if you've got the 9 or however thick your Doll's House is, then cut it from that because it just makes it a lot easier. So what I'm going to do now is stick all of my strip pieces together to make those 4 pieces of 9mm thick strip wood. And then I want to drill the holes in the top and bottom pieces. So I've glued the strips together now, and they're now drying. I want to make sure they're completely dry before I drill the holes and then fit them together. So whilst they're drying, I'm going to make a start on the hearth for the dining room. Okay, so I've got the chimney breast here and I've cut the pieces for the hearth, and I'm using the same width as I did for the living room one and the same depth as well. So that will sit on there like that. Now I've had to make this one quite high because when I went and checked for sizing inside the Doll's House, I just wanted to make sure that when the chimney breast is in place, first of all that it would actually fit back in place, but also that when I fit the skirting and coving, that they cover up the bottom line of this piece of paper. So the problem was actually at the top, and I think to explain it better I'll just take this back into the dining room and just show you what I mean. Okay, so that was my original design for the hearth, so just using a piece of 3mm sheet wood for the sort of underside and then the 2.5 for the top piece. And then when I tried the chimney breast into place, so it will sit there like that. If I then bring in my coving, the top of the paper is showing beneath the coving. So I then needed to make the chimney breast sit up higher towards the ceiling, so that's why I cut a further piece to go underneath the hearth there. So I'll just slot that into place like that. So it does make it quite high, But I've seen those sort of real stone hearths, and some of them can be quite high. And then if I try my cove in again, that is now a really nice fit, and you can't see the white of the paper beneath it. And then I also tried a piece of the skirting into place, so that will sit along there, and as you can see, the skirting is then higher than the white line on the paper there. Now if you've bought paper, it's probably going to be tall enough so that you haven't got the lines at the top and bottom of your chimney breast, but I would advise just checking when you've cut your hearth that you can get your chimney breast back into place, and that's why I always say about making it shorter than the room. And not only because of the hearth, but then when you sort of bring it in, you don't want to be struggling to sort of squeeze it into the room. You want a bit of manoeuvre space, so always make it slightly shorter. But always, at every stage when you're sort of building things, keep checking that they do still fit back where you intend them to go. Otherwise, you put a lot of work in, and then when you come to fit them, they won't fit, and that can be rather annoying. Okay, so I'll take all of this back into the craft room now. So I'm going to start by gluing together the two base pieces. So these are the pieces cut from the 3mm sheet wood, 1/8 of an inch. And I'll clamp those together, and then once they're dry, I can put that top piece on. Like that, get that all along the edges there. And pop those two pieces together, making sure you've got nice flush edges. Use your work surface to get those straightened up. And then I'm going to use my larger clamps to clamp these pieces together. Just keep sort of feeling around so that they're not sliding around with your glue, otherwise you'll clamp them and they won't be square. I'll get one on each corner. A couple of those larger ones at each side as well. And then I'll just get some small ones in the gaps there. Always a good idea to fit on as many clamps as you can. Like that. So I'm now going to leave that piece to dry and get back to my door frames. So I now want to drill the holes for the pin hinges. So I've laid my frame out here, how it will actually go, and that's with the 6mm strip on the top as it's laid out here, but so that the 6mm strip will be on the outside of the door. So this, if you imagine, this is the door looking at it from the outside of the building. And I want the door then to open inwards. So if you imagine that's the door there, it will open inwards into the room so that it sits against the back wall of the dining room. And I also want the door to be flush on the outside of the building, so the lip will be on the inside. And that's because my door is just going to be probably about 4mm thick, and obviously the frame is 9, so the 5mm lip will be on the inside of the room, and that's just so that it keeps nice and flush on the outside of the building. So with all of that said, I want the drilled holes to be on the thicker strip, so that's why I've laid it so that the thicker strip is at the top and on this side. And I'm going to do it 2.5mm in and 2.5mm back from the front. So mark that up, and obviously you want to do that the same on each of them. So I just start by doing a little line, 2.5mm from that edge, and then turn and come 2.5mm back, do your pencil dot, and that's where you'll drill the hole. And then do the same again on this one. So 2.5 in and 2.5 back. And obviously how far back with the hole you go depends on how thick your door is going to be. Now, because I'm going to have a glazed door, it's going to be layered. So I'm going to have a piece of wood in the centre, as thick as the piece of glaze, that we then sort of sandwich between the two decorative sides of the door, if you like. But obviously I'll go through all of that as I build it. But you just need to have a think about how thick the door is going to be and try and get your drilled hole more or less central. So if my door is 4mm, that would be 2, but then I just wanted to come in a little bit more so that it will have a sort of nicer swinging action on it. Okay, so I've got here in my mini drill a 0.8mm drill bit. That's about 1/32 of an inch, but basically you want one of your smaller bits that's about the size of a dressmaking pin, which is what we're going to be using for the pin hinges. So drill the holes. So I always like to write top and bottom on the pieces, and when you glue the frame together, make sure that you're getting your drilled holes on the same edge of the door. And again, I'm just saying that because it's another of those things that I've done in the past. So apply glue to each end of your shorter frame piece. And then I like to use the lines on my cutting mat to make sure that I'm getting everything square. So I'll start at the top there, lined up my left hand frame piece, and then I'm using those lines to make sure that that is straight along the top there. Push that up a bit, same at the bottom. And then bring in the remaining frame, and again just checking to make sure that I've got the 6mm strip at the top. So I'm just checking that that's all square, and then you can press the pieces together. And it's obviously quite a sort of fragile piece at the moment because you've not sort of got any backing in there to support the pieces, so you just need to give it a press until the glue begins to take. And if you want to put some little bits of tape on, you can do that. I'm just going to turn that around really carefully. I can square it up again, and then I can actually get in and give it a good press. So once you've constructed the main frame for the door, you can start actually building up your door. So take your internal measurements. So my height measurement is 184.5mm. So I've cut my pieces 184mm. So I'm just taking off that 0.5 of a millimetre so that that will fit nicely into the frame. And you always want to take a tiny amount off, even if it's 1/4 of a millimetre or something. Otherwise it will be too tight to get back into the frame and you'll have trouble opening and closing your door. And then I've done the same thing with the width. So I've taken off the width of my 2 side pieces and then cut the top and bottom pieces accordingly. Now, as I said earlier, this is going to be a glazed door, so I'm going to be sandwiching my acetate between the 2 sides. So when you're cutting the door, you want to cut 2 of everything for your sort of main part of the door. I've then got here a piece of 0.5mm thick acetate. So in between my door pieces, if I just move all of these out like that, get that frame out of the way for a moment. So if you imagine that's going to be the main sort of part of my door, or the outer edges of the door. I've then cut these spacer pieces, and for the spacers I'm using 0.8mm thick sheet wood. Now I know my acetate is 0.5mm thick, so that's going to work, but just to check, if you're using a thicker piece of acetate or you've cut it from food packaging or something like that, lay your sort of spacer piece down on your work surface, place your acetate beside it, and your spacer should be higher than your acetate, so just feel along with your finger, and if your acetate is thicker then you'll need to use a thicker piece of wood as your spacer. So that's just something to check for, otherwise you're not going to be able to sandwich the acetate in between the pieces, you're going to have a lot of gapping. So that's the first sort of check to make, and then I'll just place these spacer pieces into place. So that will go there. Remember to cut your top and bottom pieces wider to allow for the 3mm that you're taking off. So I've made my spacers 9mm. And the idea of that is then we've got this lip all the way round on the inside where the acetate will sit. And it's all moving around obviously because I haven't glued it or anything yet. And then the acetate will lodge in there. I'll just do it on that side just to show you, and then these pieces will go on top like that, so that will be sandwiched in there with the spacers. So that's the sort of basic structure of the door. So that will be all the pieces that you need for your main outer frame. And then for my little pane divides, I'm going to be using this 1.5mm strip. So I've just pulled lots of pieces out of my tube here. Now, I did say about having those 8 panes, but as I've sort of been sat here cutting the wood, I'm thinking about perhaps doing something a little bit more adventurous, and maybe, if I can just show you sort of really roughly here, having a couple of longer strips down the side like that. And this is where you can get really inventive with your sort of inner pattern. I'll have a couple of pieces like that, and then I might make, you know, like the little squares along the top there, and along the bottom as well, like that. And then just perhaps have a few strips in these outer panes, so something a little bit, you know, more elegant than just the 8 symmetrical frames. I don't know if you can tell on camera what I'm trying to do there. I'll just put that final little strip in and then show you from above, just to give you a better idea what I mean. So if you just sort of look at what's inside my main frame there, so I have the 3 little panes, 1 long pane down the centre, 3 at the bottom, and then these sort of longer ones at the sides. Quite like the look of that, that looks quite nice. So whatever you do on the inside, you know, you can make it as decorative as you like. But what I'm actually going to do, because we need to paint the door before obviously putting the acetate in, you can put it all together first if you want to, but then just remember when you're painting it, you've got to be really careful not to get any on your acetate. So I like to paint the pieces first and then construct it all, put in the acetate inside. Then we can round off the hinged edge and then just pop a little bit more paint on there. So that's sort of how we're going to be doing it. But what I'm going to do is just paint up some of these strip pieces as holes, and then when we come to build the door I can cut them to size once they're painted. So I'll just sort of put these pieces to one side and I'll put some paint on those. Those can go to one side as well, the inner spacers. But what I am going to do is construct these 2 main frames and then paint them. And they're nice sort of big pieces that can be painted on just the one side, because obviously they're going to be sandwiched together. And these you would just glue together as we did the frame, just making sure that they're square. Then we can get some paint on and then start building up our door. So I sanded all of my pieces and I've glued together the main parts of the door here. I've stuck these onto my painting sheet because obviously I only need to do the one side of each of those, but everything else I've left loose so that I can get along all edges and the undersides as well. There's my pieces of strip there. I've got my gloves on so I can protect my hands from the paint. So I'm going to do a couple of coats on each of these pieces. Once the first coat has dried, I'll give them all a gentle sand. And then we'll construct the door, and then when we've sanded the rounded edge for the hinge side of the door, I'll do another coat of paint along there. Okay, so that's a coat of paint on each of those pieces. I'm now going to leave those to dry, and it's almost lunchtime, so when I come back from lunch I'll give those a gentle sand and then apply the second coat. But just before I stop for lunch, I want to get the hearth top glued into place. So once they had dried, I sanded around all the edges, so that's now a nice flush piece. And then I've just gone around the top edge of the sides and front edge of this piece, just with a piece of 500 grade sandpaper, just to very gently round off those edges, which is just more pleasing to the eye than the sort of straight, harsh edges. So I'm now going to stick this into place. I'm just going to put the glue directly onto the base. Spread that out. Like that. And then I've done it so that there's just a slight overhang at each edge. So if I just get that roughly on there like that and then stand it up, and then I'm just going to push the base into the centre there, just looking from each side to make sure I've got the same amount overhanging, and I've got that nice lip at the front as well. Just give those a good press together. I'm just going to get rid of that excess glue and then I'll pop the clamps back on. One more on there. So I can now leave that to dry. And now it really is time for lunch because my stomach's rumbling. So I'll see you in a bit. So my hearth is now dry and I want to start by giving it a base coat of the natural calico. So I'm just going to start by going around underneath the lip, and then I'm going to attach it to a painting sheet to get across the top, which just makes it easier. Okay, so that's one good coat of paint on there. I'm now going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to create a very sort of subtle marble effect on there. So whilst the hearth is drying, I'm going to come back to my door. So the door has now had 2 coats of paint and a gentle sand after each coat had dried. But I've just noticed that I've missed some little areas just on the inside edge of the frame there, and that will obviously be visible once all of the pieces are in place. So I'm just going around while I've got the paint out and just touching those in. It's just sort of little tiny areas like that that you want to make sure are all covered. So I've done the other frame and I think I've got everything on there now. Just going to go around and have a really good look around. A little bit down there. Okay, so that shouldn't take long to dry, and I'm going to put them in that sunny patch over there on the desk. And then I can actually start building up the door. Okay, so the frames are now dry and I want to make a start on creating the panes inside. Just to say that when I was sanding my outer frame, the glue came apart in the 2 corners, so I've just re-glued that and that is now drying, and I've put a couple of clamps on there, as you can see, just to hold that in place. So with the door, I want to start with the longer strip. So turn your first piece over and then decide where you want your longer strips to be placed. Now I'm having 2, so you can do it evenly if you wanted to, but I might just do them an equal distance from each side and have a bit of a wider gap in the middle there. So whatever you decide upon, you want to make your pencil marks at the top and bottom, obviously on the wrong side of the door. So let's bring in the rule, nice sharp pencil, and let's have a look. It's 50mm, so I think I'll come in 12.5 from each side. That just keeps it nice and even then. And then I'll position the strip in the centre of that pencil line. So do that at each end of the door. I'm just working on that shorter strip there, so 12.5 from each edge, like that. In fact, I might mark up my other frame at the same time, that way you don't forget the measurements that you've used. Just pop that out of the way. And then you want to actually cut the first strip. So lay it into place where it will sort of sit. Bring in your craft knife, or you can use your pencil for this, but I just like to use the knife. And make a little score of where you need to cut. And then move it away from your door so you don't cut into the door, and actually make the cut. And all of these little offcuts I want to keep. So that piece will go there, and I just cut it slightly longer than I thought I would need it. And that way you can trim a little bit off, but obviously if you cut it too short, you can't then make it longer. So I do just need to trim another tiny little bit off the end there. And you want a nice tight fit in there. And with these 1.5mm strips, with all strip wood and all sheet wood, there's always a little bit of tolerance. So they're not always 1.5mm square. So they're 1.5 across, but then if I turn, I've only probably got a millimetre or just over on that side. So when you're positioning them, make sure that you're getting the edge that is 1.5mm. Otherwise it's going to be raised above the thickness of your door if you've used the 1.5mm sheet wood. So always just have a think about which way you're turning them. And then the other thing is, although that fits in there, I'm getting a little bit of bowing. So I just need to take a tiny bit more off because it's sort of pushing it out. So I'll take a little bit off the other end this time. Again, just a tiny bit at a time. You don't want to take too much off and then have to recut. That's a nicer fit this time. Like that. So I need two pieces like that. I'm just going to take a bit off the end of that one because that's where I held it, so I haven't painted that very end. So what I want to do now is have three pieces going along the top there. And if I measure from the outside edge to the start of my strip, that's 11.5mm. So I'm going to position them that much down from the top as well. And I'm going to cut that first piece 11.5, and that then acts as a sort of spacer which will square up these outer ones. So all the way along here the pieces will be 11.5, and then you know you're sort of keeping it square. So I'll want 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of 11.5mm to start with. So let's just cut those, 11.5. You want to make sure here you're quite precise with your cutting as well, getting all of your pieces to the exact same length. So I've cut the 4 pieces to go in the corner, and I've done that for each door, and then I've cut an extra 8 pieces, again 4 for each door, for these sort of little panels that will go along these sides. And then this is all the strip I've got left, and I realised I'm going to need 4 more pieces of the width of that central part, so I'm not going to have enough. So I've just painted a bit more strip, and that's drying over there. I thought I'd done enough, but obviously not. So what I want to do now is start gluing these pieces into place. I'm going to start with the long strips, but then I'm going to do the shorter ones straight away, so that if I need to then move these a bit, the glue will still be tacky so that I can move them over. And I think that will be the easiest way to do it. So I've made my little 11.5mm pencil marks on each side of the door and on these central strips as well. And that way you'll get them square. And you can do any sort of marking up on the back of the door, which is what we're working on. as obviously that's not going to be seen once the two pieces are sandwiched together. Get that bit in there like that. Position it as best as you can, but we will be sort of jiggling it over to meet these other pieces. And then this one as well. Getting a little bit of bow in with that one as well, but putting these side pieces in will straighten that out. The lines on the cut it mat are a bit confusing at the moment because it's just like there's sort of strips everywhere. But they do sort of help when you're lining things up as well as your pencil marks. Okay, so let's get the first smaller section in. And as you're doing them, because we're sort of working at the back, always have the nicest edge so that it's facing towards the front. So that when we turn the door over, we're not going to get any nasty surprises. And then with these, I'm just sitting them below that pencil mark. So then I'm left with a little square gap at the top. I just think that needs to come over a tiny bit. It's quite nice. I'll do the one at the bottom as well. And like I say, I'm not giving sort of exact measurements for this because I think you can, you know, on the inside more or less do whatever pattern you like. So you might choose to do something slightly different, but it's so easy to do once you've sort of got your main structure of the door built. It would be pointless sort of giving you measurements because your door opening might not be the same as mine either. Okay, so that's those first two pieces. I'll do the other corners as well before that strip dries too much into place. So I've got both door frames now to the same stage, and then what you want to sort of keep doing as you go along is just lay one on top of the other in the sort of correct position, so back to back like that, and just make sure that your pieces are in alignment. Now if you're following your measurements then they should be, but it's just worth checking just in case you have sort of knocked a little piece out of place or something, because obviously if they don't sort of line up like this, then when you come to sandwich your acetate in between, that's going to be noticeable. You're going to see the back of one from the front of the door. So just sort of keep checking as you go along. And I now want to put two more smaller little slats on these outside panels. So I divided the distance between the two pieces there by 3, taking into account the depth of my little strips, and that comes to about 43.5. So I've measured down from there and up from there, and I've done that on both sides, and then I just went across with my rule and copied the little lines onto those central slats, and that again just keeps it all square. So I'm going to put these next little bits into place, and then I just want sort of 2 more bits on each door on that inside panel, and I think that's then sort of really easy design but with a really nice effect. And this is one of those areas where you can really sort of show your creative side. So you can have something a little bit more simple, or, you know, really go mad with it. Right, so pressing those pieces together, making sure that little slat is lined up. And because the pieces are so small, it's easy to sort of keep moving them out of place, but do just sort of use your lines. Once you've got them into the right place, give them a good press. Like where, for example, I've got some paint missing on this side, where I've obviously chipped it when I've cut the pieces, I'll have that facing in this way, so that then the nicest side will be showing on the right side of the door. So think about that as you go along as well. But you know, you can always touch up the paint before we then enclose the acetate if you need to. So it's not too much of a problem if you've got any paint missing on the right side of the door. It's all fixable. So that's all of those smaller strip pieces in place, and I'm happy that the doors are lining up when I sandwich them together like that. So I've now cut the final little pieces of strip, and these are going to go at the top and bottom of each door. Now when you're cutting these pieces, because obviously we can't now move these wider strips, you want them to have a really nice fit in there, so to be quite tight, so to hold themselves in. And I don't want to force that one in too much, but I know that has got a really nice fit up there. Or maybe I've just swapped them round and that one goes up there. And they should just sort of nicely, you know, click into place like that. Yeah, so they will actually hold themselves in. So that's what you want them to do on these final strips. So I'm now going to glue these into place. And then I'll have a look from the front and see if I need to give another coat of paint. So put that one in there and get it lined up with the outer two. Make sure you keep sort of pressing everything against your work surface as well. Make sure it's all sitting nice and flat. And that final one down here. I'm so glad I decided to go for a bit more of a detailed design than just the panes that were in it when it originally came. I really like that. That will let lots of nice light into the dining room as well. So I'll finish this one. The battery on the camera is just starting to flash, or has just started to flash. So I'll finish this one, then go and grab some lunch, and then we'll be back to complete this door. So again, I'll see you in a bit. So the doors have now dried, but I am going to give them another coat of paint just to touch in some pieces where the paint is missing and where it's slightly lighter on the strips than the rest of the door. So the frames are now dry and I'm really pleased with those, but I just want to show you the door surround, which I've just sort of dry fitted into the opening, and I had to take it apart again because where I'd applied the paint it just wasn't going back in. So I took it apart, trimmed a little bit off the top and the bottom pieces, and when you do any trimming on the top and bottom where you've already drilled the hole, take it off of the other end, otherwise you're going to put the hole you know, further in, or further in if you trim too much off, and it will be too close to the edge of your door. So I trimmed and then I've gone back in, and because I hadn't let my glue fully dry, I've just popped a little bit of masking tape around each join, which is holding it together. So from the inside now, that slots in really nicely. But if I just show you from the outside, let's just go around here. See how you can see the surround from the outside, and that's because I just haven't got any more room to push that back. That's basically, there's only sort of 2mm overlap with this external surround, and obviously I don't want to remove those as that's going to just completely ruin this part of the outside. So I'm going to leave those there. So I can't adjust it anymore to hide it because I haven't got the room, and it fits perfectly from the inside where I need to slot it into place. So what I will do is, once the door is actually complete, is come around with this stone coating paint, and I will just colour all of this so that it's the same colour as the surround. And it's not ideal, but because obviously I did remove the door that was already fitted, it's going to be the sort of best solution. But before you do sort of finally start fitting the sort of actual opening part of the door into the frame, you do want to just make sure that your frame fits into place and make any small adjustments that may be needed. So I'm just going to pop this back out and take it back into the craft room. So once you've adjusted your frame, you then need to check if your door pieces actually fit into it. And when I've come to refit mine, they are half a millimetre too wide. So I'm going to trim, but I'm going to trim 1/4 of a millimetre from each edge so that you keep the door even or symmetrical. So I've made the little marks on the back. So I'm just going to really carefully trim along there now. And I'm trimming it to sort of just fit into the door, and then when we do the rounding from our long edge for the hinged edge, that will take probably another sort of 1/4 of a millimetre off and give us that gapping that we need to have a nicely opening or smoothly opening and closing door. So I'm holding nice and tightly onto the rule. I'm just going to do a light score to start. And you just want to be really careful because you don't want to damage obviously the bit of the door that you want to keep, or pull too much paint off or anything like that. So just nice and slowly, nice sharp blade. And that's 1/2 a millimetre, or 1/4 of a millimetre off there. And the same at the other side. Like that. And then try again into your frame. And I'm now happy with the fit. So I need to do that as well with the other side. Okay, so we're now ready to glue the acetate spacers into place. So start by trimming them if you've had to make adjustments to your door, and I've just trimmed the long ones. I'll glue those into place and then trim the shorter ones. So just apply glue to one side. As you can see, I only painted along the edges of these, or the sides, because that's the only bit that's going to be seen. But we may need to do a little bit more touching up with the paint once the door is sort of ready for fitting, or prior to fitting. Okay. So glue that first one into place, so it's sitting right along the edge of the door there. And you want that nice straight edge. And you don't want any overlap in here, otherwise your door isn't going to fit again. You're going to make it wider again. So make sure it's right along the edge. A good way to check that is to sort of hold it flat against your work surface. But be careful with your door. It is still rather flimsy at this stage. First one there. And I said we may need to do some touching up with the paint, but obviously we will have to because I trimmed each edge of the door, so I've taken the paint off of the side there. So that's the second long strip in place. I'm now going to trim the top and bottom ones. I've just got a millimetre or so to trim off that end. So I'm going to mark it up again using my knife. Just make a score where I need to cut, but cut it away from the door. You always want to do that as you'll end up cutting into your door frame. Again, very annoying at this stage. A bit more off there. Tiny bit. I always like to cut and check before sort of applying the glue. Again, get right along the top edge of the door there, but not overhanging. And the same for the other end. Okay, so that's those pieces in place. So I've now created a nice lip around that inside edge to slot the acetate. So my doors will then go together like that, or my door pieces. And as I just gave that a little try, just to make sure that it all looks good, I noticed that I can see some of the clear wood inside the little slot. So the acetate will be sitting there, but obviously that's going to be clear, so I'll still be able to see those unpainted areas. So what I'm going to do now is just put a very thin layer of paint just around the little slot here that I've created, and then just around this edge of the door as well. So I'll do that next, and it's almost sort of woody walk time now, so I'm going to have to leave this for today, but if I can't get back to it this evening, I'll be back in the morning. So I'll see you then.